Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Coming up today on The Story.
I failed and I wasn't elected, and so suddenly the day after the 1998 election, at the end of 98, I was unemployed. So I guess I needed to find a job. So I went to see some friends at the Bible Society. It's an organisation I've had a lot of involvement with over the years, and said, what can you do with a used politician? And they came up with a plan. Long story short, they wanted us to go to Mongolia.
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, strap on your seatbelts and get ready for a ride, because we're about to hear John Bradford's rapidly moving life story. And as we'll hear, he's been travelling from one venture to another all of his life. John has gone from being a federal member of parliament to being an overseas missionary with stops in London, Mongolia and the United States, just to name a few of the places he's been. He's written about his adventures in his book, An Abundant Life, From MP to Missionary, The Life and Times of John Bradford. He's having a chat with Karen Hunt.
John, let's go back to the early days of little Johnny Boy. Where were you born, and what did your family look like, and what was life like then?
Oh, well, I was born in Sydney, actually on the northern beaches of Sydney, very shortly after the end of the Second World War, which seems like a long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm actually on the very front edge. I could hardly be more on the front edge of the baby boomers, Karen. I was born on the 3rd of January, 1946.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
The baby boomer generation started a couple of days before that, so I was right on the front edge of that. I was born in Sydney. My dad was a returned serviceman. He'd been off fighting in the Second World War, and came home, and not long after, well, I guess, say 9 months after, I came along, and that was it. And we had a very happy home life as kids. I had a couple of brothers subsequently, and life was good for us, living up on the northern beaches of Sydney, up at Newport in those days.
Lovely.
And it was just idyllic, I think, as I remember it. Although the post-war years were tough for everybody, and I think for returned servicemen, I seem to vaguely recall my dad having difficulty settling down. My mum sort of took care of that, and I remember she basically took hold of him one day and said, look, you've got a family now, mate. Forget about going down the pub with the diggers. Your focus is on your family. So that's the way we were. We're very fortunate.
So you were the oldest of the boys?
I was, yeah, the oldest of three. I have two younger brothers. 3 years. We're 3 years apart, so... Yep, 3 of us.
And where did you go to school, and what did you enjoy?
Oh, well, I started school actually, the very first school I went to was in the Newport Surf Club of all places. I think it was like a kindy. I remember that as being a really happy time. Then I went to the Newport Primary School, and then the family moved to the North Shore of Sydney. I think it was, I don't know quite exactly why, but anyway, we moved to Roseville. Oh, well, it was my dad's mother's house that we moved into, and we put a granny flat on for her. So then I went to Roseville Roseville Primary School, and then eventually to North Sydney Boys High School.
Were you always a good talker?
Yeah.
You're a great communicator.
I was actually an organiser, Karen. I think if there was something to be organised, whether it was the school fete or whatever it was, it seemed to me that I'd step up to the plate to do it.
No surprises at all. So when you were young, what were you hoping to get into?
Oh, well, I had a lot of options towards the end of my school years. Law was one. I mean, I always sort of fancied being a lawyer. Mm-hmm. In the end, I did well at economics at school, and then went on to do economics at Sydney University, majoring in accounting. So I eventually became both an economist and an accountant. It's a strange combination.
Wow.
And then later did a diploma in education, so I did a bit of teaching, actually at tertiary level teaching, not high school teaching.
So where does the politics come into this story?
Oh, well, I always had, I suppose, an interest in politics. My parents were quite conservative politically, so I sort of followed their politics as much as anything. But as I went through university years, I became increasingly interested in politics. But then I went into the army. I was conscripted. I was a national serviceman, went through officer training and spent a year in Vietnam. After I came back from Vietnam, I decided I was a little unsettled. I went to live in America for a while, and it was there, I guess, that I really got interested in politics. It was during the Nixon years. and I came back to Australia. Actually, we're talking about this at the right time. At about the time that Gough Whitlam got elected, I sort of looked from afar and figured I'd better come home and help save the country, which I did.
There you go. So where did you come from in America?
Oh, well, I lived in San Francisco in that time for a year or two. But, yeah, when I came back to Australia, I figured that I'd better get involved in the Liberal Party because I see the country going down the gurgler, with the greatest respect to the dear departed Gough. But I was very much in the forefront of fighting to get Malcolm Fraser elected as Prime Minister, and, of course, the rest is almost history, I suppose.
Were you a Christian at that stage?
Yes, I was. Yes, yeah? I became a Christian, actually, when I was about 12 years old. Became a Christian at a boys' camp in Sydney. It was called Camp Howard. It's still going strongly, Church of England camps. And we'd always gone to Sunday school. I mean, that seemed to be the pattern in those days. My parents were not churchgoers. They weren't Christians. But they did send us to Sunday school, and I guess I became very interested in that, and eventually I became a Christian when I was about 12 years old. That was in about 1958.
John, what happened when you came back, and was that an easy transition for you?
Well, I came back to a fairly substantial family business, and that was always the plan when I went off to join into the army. When I was conscripted, that I'd come back into our business. We had a fairly successful and substantial family business, so I was committed to going back into the family business, and that's what I came to do when I came home from America in '73. But I was also became actively involved then in the Liberal Party on the northern beaches of Sydney, or it was earlier than that. It was actually the North Shore of Sydney. But I also took an interest. I figured that probably the way to start would be to get involved in local politics. So by this time, the family had moved to the northern beaches of Sydney. We lived in Collaroy, and so I ran for the Warringah Council. I wasn't successful the first time, but I got elected the second time, and subsequently spent 9 years in local government in Sydney, at the same time working in the family business.
So politics and business, a good mix locally?
Oh, yeah. In fact, it was. Life was pretty good. Well, it's always been good, actually, but it was a great time. I was very much involved in this local surfing community. That was one of my favourite sports at the time. I'd been surfing right from my university years.
Yeah.
When I should have been studying, I was surfing, I think, a lot, and I continued that, and I'm still surfing to this day, all those years later.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Tell us about your family. When and how did your wife come along into the picture?
Oh, well, Judy came along quite a bit later. I was 37 when I got married, Judy was quite a bit younger than me, and still is quite a bit younger than me. So she came along quite some time after that. But I'd progressed in the family business, and life was going along quite well. In fact, I'd probably got to the point where I thought I might not ever get married. I mean, I'd had a few relationships along the way, but Judy came along in the early 80s by now we are, aren't we? And she swept me off my feet, and we got married very quickly, actually, after we met, I'd say. We were both working at the time with an organisation called Youth for Christ, which was very big in those days. Judy was a staff member, or a sort of volunteer staff member, and I was a board member in Sydney, and we sort of came together in that way. And, one thing led to another, and we were quickly married, and life went on from there.
And you have children?
3 children, yeah. Tim came along pretty soon afterwards. More than 9 months afterwards, I hasten to add. And then Sally came along not long after that, and then there was a gap of about 6 or 7 years till our youngest, Lisa, came along. Our youngest is 21, and we've had 3 wonderful children, and Judy's been a wonderful wife and mum for over 30 years, so I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, God bless them all. Now, were they a part of your political career as well? Well,
they were very much. I mean, by the time they came along, I was in federal parliament. Now, that's kind of a big leap, I guess, from where we were. But after I'd finished my 3 terms in local government, we decided to move to Queensland. We're talking now 1987, and for a lot of reasons, we decided to pack up and leave Sydney and come to live in Queensland when we moved to the Gold Coast. And it wasn't very long after that I got back involved in the Liberal Party up here, and not too long after that again that I was pre-selected for the federal seat of McPherson, which at those days covered almost the whole Gold Coast, and then shortly after was elected to the Parliament. So our two older children were very much a part of all of that and lived for the 9 years that I was a federal MP.
Yeah.
I was away a lot of the time. Judy had to take care of the family, and so that's where she excelled as a mother, and I got involved in spending most of my time in Canberra.
Tell us about your interest in Aboriginal rights and other issues there. You seem to have a heart for the native people of our country.
Well, that came later again, I think. In the early days in the Parliament as a Conservative MP, it wasn't an area where you sort of really wanted to say too much. I mean, whilst there was a general sort of lip service towards the needs of our Indigenous people, nothing much was being done. But towards the end of my time in the Parliament, I became closely involved with a number of Aboriginal folk who became quite good friends. Mm-hmm. And it was a time the whole debate on native title was going on, and there were a lot of issues, and I became increasingly sympathetic towards them, and that's when I decided, actually, towards the end of my time in the Parliament, to leave the Liberal Party and run for the Senate in Queensland under the Christian Democratic Party banner, and I had an Aboriginal running mate there, so that was quite a leap for me, and for a lot of my Conservative colleagues, and I came from the Conservative wing of the Liberal Party, I think they probably were a bit shocked.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Karen Hunt is having a chat with former politician John Bradford. We've just been hearing about his time involved in politics. Next, we'll hear about his overseas adventures as a missionary. That and more when we return.
The Story. If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax, and this is The Story. We're continuing with Karen Hunt chatting with John Bradford about his eclectic life story, which he's written a book about, An Abundant Life from MP to Missionary, The Life and Times of John Bradford. Before the break, we heard about his time being involved in Australian politics. Now we're going to hear about the second chapter in his life.
I know at a certain time in your life, with your wife and with your kids, you found yourself unemployed. What was that season like, and what was that the springboard for?
Well, I contested the 1998 federal election, running for the Senate in Queensland under the Christian Democratic banner, having left the Liberal Party. That was at the zenith, I guess, of Pauline Hanson's rise, and so I was unsuccessful. So was she, incidentally, but she was a bit more successful than I was, and she was really creating quite a storm, so I had to compete against that. Anyway, I failed, and I wasn't elected, and so suddenly the day after the 1998 election, at the end of 98, I was unemployed. So I guess I needed to find a job, and that's what led to the next part of my story, which I guess is almost a whole new story in itself. But anyway, Judy and I joked about it. I mean, it's a matter of when that happens, if you're sort of a rooster one day and a feather duster the next.
Yeah.
And that I was. But I went to see some friends of the Bible Society. It's an organisation I've had a lot of involvement with over the years, and said, what can you do with a used politician? And they came up with a plan. A long story short, they wanted us to go to Mongolia and sort of help facilitate the translation of the Bible in Mongolia. So I came home and told Judy up there, I said, well, the good news is I've got a job. The bad news is it's in Mongolia.
Yeah.
Well, Judy said, where's Mongolia? And we sort of grabbed the atlas and found where it was up there, way up in the north of China, between China and Russia. And within weeks, I think we were on our way to Mongolia with our three little kids. I think Tim was by this time 14, Sally was 12, and little Lisa was 6. And suddenly we're in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
What an adventure. How did you all assimilate there?
Well, with some difficulty, but we knew it wasn't going to be easy. I mean, we left the Gold Coast and it was about plus 30 degrees, and we got to Ulaanbaatar via Hong Kong and Beijing, so we had a little break on the way. But it was sort of minus 30 degrees when we got there, So it was difficult. We duty again rose to the occasion. We found a place to live, a sort of a place anyway, and got on with my job, which was really to sort of work to solve some problems that the translation team was having, and they were quite complex problems, and it would take some time to go into them. But the job was challenging, let's put it that way. So I got on with my job, and that's what we did there. We stayed in Mongolia for about 6 months, and that was the deal I did with the Bible Society, to spend 6 months there. And then we left and travelled around the world with the family for some time, and eventually found our way back to Australia.
Wow, you guys are adventurers. Now, that's not the only Christian ministry and mission organisation you've been involved with. You've also worked for the Mercy Ships, a great Christian medical charity. Did that come about in a similar time frame, or...?
Oh, yeah. Well, soon after we came back to Australia from that Mongolia, I was looking for another job, and I actually knew Mercy Ships was part of Youth with a Mission then, so I had good friends in YWAM. In fact, the boss of YWAM, if you can call him that, in the southeast, knew that I was looking for something, and again, long story short, we ended up going to join YWAM Mercy Ships, as it was then, living in Texas in the United States. So packed up our family again. The kids were into another school, going to school in America, and I was working as the Vice President for Development for Mercy Ships International in Tyler, Texas.
Is that something you saw as a longer-term opportunity, or was that another short-term stint?
Oh, no, this was for a few years, and I travelled a lot in that time to the ships, to visit the ships and to take donors to the ships. Our focus in the United States was on the Caribbean, where we had a ship working, and of course we had a bigger ship working on the west coast of Africa, so I was in and out of Sierra Leone and Benin quite a bit. But so after we'd finished after we finished in Texas, I was sent to the United Kingdom, to London, as the CEO of Mercy Ships there. So the family packed up again, and all went to move to London, and new schools again, the whole deal all over again. So.
Well, no wonder you've just written a book entitled My Abundant Life.
Yes, it's been pretty good. Abundance the word. I'm sort of picking up on the words of Jesus, and I guess you'd say it's his promise that we can have abundant lives, and I guess the word abundant means lots of different things to different people, but I think I've come to understand what it means.
An abundant life, a big time, that's for sure. Now, the last thing you just shared was that you spent 2 years as CEO of Mercy Ships UK. So give us a little bit of a headline. You've had other involvements along the journey before your current life coaching season. What are some of those things in a nutshell?
Oh, well, when we came back from England, that was around 2004, I was looking for new things to do again, and for a while I worked actually on the local radio station in the Gold Coast on 4CRB as a political commentator, talkback programs. Enjoyed that. I ran for Mayor of the Gold Coast in 2007, unsuccessfully, against my friends Rob Mulhook and Tom Tate. And anyway, so life goes on. And then I went to UCB, and Warby asked me if I'd come and give you guys a hand with your fundraising, which I was happy to do. And during the course of that year, we'd expressed an interest in going away with Australian Volunteers International. By this time, our kids are somewhat off our hands. So we went, during that year I was with UCB, we went through the process of being selected by AVIs and then went to Vanuatu for a year. So we were in Vanuatu 2011, 2012, working with Australian Volunteers International. We've just come back from another 10 weeks in Vanuatu as well, working with some missionaries there. So the life coaching thing's very recent. And I'm not, certain how that'll go. I mean, a lot of people said to me along the way, wow, you could really help people. And people have frequently asked me to mentor. I don't like that word so much, but to help them or advise them. And so I've just formalised that a bit. And I don't want to get too busy, mind you, but but I'm there and I'm available and I'm already getting some interesting assignments.
Well, John, I can't imagine you sitting still.
You've got to sit still sooner or later, but I think for me it's going to be a bit later. I mean, it's maybe the best is yet to come, Karen. I'd sort of hesitate to think that might be the case when life's been so good so far, but you never know what God's got planned, do you?
Yeah, we don't, but He does. Now, your book, My Abundant Life, From MP to Missionary. I mean, you're on a God mission 24/7 every day of your life. You're doing amazing things. So JWB Coaching, is it mostly targeted for pre-retirement or a different audience?
Oh no, I think it's anybody really. I mean, I'm writing blogs for it. I fortunately got a very capable guy helping me handle all that side of it, the blogging, and then he's got me involved with Twitter and Facebook and all these things that, sort of are still quite strange animals for me to get my head around, but we've got to do all of that. So fortunately I've got somebody handling all of that side of it for me, and I enjoy writing blogs. I mean, I've been writing a lot of stuff about leadership, and I don't know whether anybody's reading any of it, but I'm getting a bit of a kick out of writing it anyway. So I suppose it's just a matter of me, offering myself to anybody who really wants some advice, and they want to pay me something, I suppose that would be okay, but I don't really need the money, and I'm not looking for that so much as just being available to help people.
So what can you do for people as a life coach specifically?
Well, I think the idea is it's a fairly modern profession. I mean, it's something that's fairly new, and I wondered about when I first heard about it. Why would anybody need a coach? But I've come to understand as a golf player, for example, that if you're going to be competent in something, then you need to have a coach. If you're a sportsman, every sports team has a coach. So why not a life coach? And I think as a Christian life coach, I'm not a pastor. I'm not qualified to be a pastor, but there are things that people perhaps want some help or advice, and people do encounter difficulties along the way. But I'm not offering to counsel people necessarily. It's a bit of a different role to that as well. So we'll see what happens. We'll give it a shot.
And I think you'd be a fun friend regardless.
Well, I'd like to be.
John, are you guys involved in a local church at all?
Yeah, we go to Rabina Uniting Church. It's actually called New Life. Our pastor there is a great guy.
John, God bless you and your family, and thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Karen. It's been really good talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was Karen Hunt having a chat with John Bradford, author of the book An Abundant Life, From MP to Missionary, The Life and Times of John Bradford. And what an abundant life he's had. I hope you're able to keep up with all of the twists and turns in his story and all of the locations he's lived. His life is a picture of the verse in the Bible where Jesus says, I have come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. And an abundant life refers to a life that's abounding in fullness of joy, and it is without emptiness or dissatisfaction. It's a life that's available to all who put their faith and trust in Jesus. And if you want to read John's book called An Abundant Life, it's available online. You can find it just by a quick Google search for John Bradford and the words abundant life. Well, thanks for joining us for John's story. I'm Jimmy Colefax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.